All right, let's talk pirates. But forget everything you think you know. Forget the swashbuckling heroes, the witty one-liners, the magical compasses. We are peeling back that Hollywood fantasy to get to the grit, the grime, and the brutal truth of the Golden Age of Piracy. This isn't a story about adventure for adventure's sake. No, this is the story of how thousands of desperate, unemployed sailors became the absolute terror of the high seas. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That's not a line from a horror movie. That was written in the 1720s by someone trying to describe a real person. And he wasn't trying to be poetic. He was trying to convey the sheer, bone-deep terror people felt when they saw the man known as Blackbeard. This wasn't some charming rogue. This was a walking, breathing nightmare. And that image, that carefully crafted horror, well, that was his greatest weapon. So you've got to ask, right? What creates a man like Blackbeard? What creates an entire generation of them? Well, the answer isn't some romantic thirst for freedom or a lust for gold. The truth is much more, well, boring, and a whole lot more tragic. The Golden Age of Piracy was born out of a massive, crippling economic crisis. Okay, this right here, this is the whole story. At the beginning of the 18th century, the War of the Spanish Succession ends. Sounds good, right? Peace is good. Well, not if you're one of the tens of thousands of sailors in the British Royal Navy. Overnight, you're out of a job. You have a very specific, very dangerous set of skills, and suddenly no one's hiring. Now, in a place like the Netherlands, those sailors could go work in the booming fishing industry. But in Britain, there was nothing. No social safety net, no unemployment benefits, no retraining programs. For thousands of these men, the choice wasn't really a choice at all. It was turn pirate or watch your family starve. So, in this world of desperation, how does one man, Edward Teach, become the face of terror itself? It's because he was a genius. Not a military genius, but a genius of psychological warfare. He understood something crucial. Actually fighting is risky and expensive. The real prize is getting your enemy to surrender without firing a single shot. So he didn't just become a pirate, he created a brand, a persona. He decided to become the devil himself. And this wasn't just a look, it was pure theater. Picture this. His ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, pulls alongside yours, and out on the deck steps this giant of a man. His huge black beard is braided and tied with ribbons, and sticking out of it and from under his hat are these slow-burning fuses, the kind you use to light a cannon. They're fizzing and sputtering, shrouding his face in a thick, choking cloud of sulfurous smoke. Now ask yourself, are you going to fight that, or are you just going to hand over the cargo? For most, the answer was pretty simple. And here's the part that is just going to blow your mind. For all the legends, for all the books and movies, for a name that has echoed through history for 300 years, Blackbeard's entire career as the infamous captain we know lasted about 2 years. That's it. 2. He was a supernova, an incredibly violent, brilliant explosion that burned out almost as fast as it began. And honestly, his story is the story of the entire era. It was fast, it was brutal, and it was short. If you need any more proof that this guy's image was everything to him, get a load of this story. One day, on his ship, he allegedly turns to his crew and says this. He then takes them down into the ship's hold, seals the hatches, and lights pots of brimstone, pure sulfur. The hold fills with suffocating poisonous fumes. One by one, the crew coughs and sputters and begs to be let out, until only Blackbeard is left, sitting there in the smoke. He was the last one to come out, proving to his terrified crew that he really was tougher than the devil. It wasn't just about being tough. It was about maintaining that absolute aura of fear. Now, you might think of pirates as these lone outlaws, but the reality was a lot more complicated. Blackbeard didn't just operate out in the wild. He had friends in very high places. Turns out, he had a sweet little arrangement with Charles Eden, the actual governor of North Carolina. The deal was simple. Blackbeard brings in the loot, and Governor Eden provides a safe harbor and a blind eye. The whole thing was exposed after Blackbeard was killed. They found letters on his ship proving the entire conspiracy. In fact, the governor's secretary was so panicked about being implicated. The story goes he literally got sick with fear and died a few days later. That's how deep the corruption went. So once Blackbeard is gone, decapitated in his final battle, and his political protection is gone with him, what happens to his crew? Well, this number tells you everything. 13. That's how many of his surviving men were rounded up, quickly put on trial, and just as quickly, hanged. For them, there was no corrupt governor to offer a pardon. The party was over. This was the cold, hard reality at the end of the line for a pirate. Okay, so we've got this picture of a brutal, violent, exclusively male world, right? Well, history loves to throw a curveball, and this might be one of the greatest curveballs ever.
because on the ship of a pirate captain named Calico Jack Rackham, two of the most competent, feared, and respected fighters on board were, and this was completely unthinkable at the time, women. Their names were Anne Bonny and Mary Read.
I mean, seriously? You could not make this up. Mary Read's life story is more incredible than any fiction. She spends her childhood pretending to be her dead brother just so her family can collect an inheritance. Then, still disguised as a man, she joins the British Army. And she's not a cook or a clerk, she's a soldier, fighting in the infantry and the cavalry in major European wars. She even falls in love with another soldier, reveals she's a woman, and they get married. After he dies, she gets on a ship headed for the Caribbean, it gets taken by pirates, and because she's proven she can fight better than any man, they force her to join them. She didn't just survive in a man's world, she dominated it. So let's fast forward to October 1720. The authorities have finally tracked down Calico Jack's ship. They launch a surprise attack in the middle of the night, and what are the pirates doing? What you'd probably expect. Most of the men are completely passed out drunk. When the alarm sounds, they're so hammered and terrified that they just hide below deck, refusing to fight. Total chaos and cowardice.
And who were the only people on deck who had the guts to fight back against the authorities? A single, unnamed man, and, you guessed it, Anne Bonny and Mary Read. The two women fought like absolute demons, and they were so disgusted with their male crewmates that they reportedly fired their own pistols down into the hold, screaming at the men to come up and fight like men. Can you just imagine the sheer fury, the contempt they must have felt in that moment before they were finally overwhelmed? Absolutely incredible. So this raises a pretty big question. What was life actually like on one of these ships? Was it just total anarchy? Well, the fascinating thing is, it was a total paradox. It was, on one hand, a shockingly democratic and orderly society, and on the other, it was an absolute pit of drunken, violent chaos. Just look at this. At a time of absolute monarchs and brutal naval discipline, a pirate ship was one of the most democratic places on the planet. Every man got an equal vote on major decisions. They elected their captains, and they could vote them out too. And get this, they had workers' compensation. If you lost a leg or an arm in battle, you got a huge payout, 800 silver coins. On a Navy ship, you'd be lucky to not get thrown overboard. For sailors who were used to being treated like animals, this was a revolution. It was a true brotherhood, with a code to prove it. But for all that beautiful order, there was another side to it, and we have Blackbeard's own journal to thank for this little insight. You'd think the biggest danger on a ship full of violent men would be too much alcohol, right? Wrong. The real danger, the thing that Blackbeard feared, was sobriety. When the rum ran out, the men got somewhat sober. And what happened then? A damned confusion and rogues applauding. The moment they weren't drunk, they started to argue, to form factions, to question authority. Rum wasn't just for fun. It was a crucial tool for managing a crew of anarchists. All this talk of freedom, democracy, and endless rum, it's easy to get carried away. But we have to remember, this entire lifestyle was built on a foundation of extreme violence, and it was a life with no exit strategy. For almost every single pirate, there were only two ways their career ended: bleeding out on a ship's deck or with a rope around their neck. And even before that final end, there were punishments that were arguably worse than death. If you betrayed the crew, if you deserted them in battle, the punishment was often to be marooned. And this was a special kind of cruelty. They'd leave you on a deserted rock with basically nothing. But they always left you a pistol with just one single shot. That shot wasn't for hunting, it wasn't for defense, it was a final, grim choice they gave you. Die slowly of thirst and starvation, or take the quick way out. Let's just look at the final fates of the people we've been talking about. Blackbeard, killed in a bloody fight, his head cut off and hung from the bowsprit of his enemy's ship. Mary Read cheated the hangman only to die of a raging fever in a filthy prison. The so-called gentleman pirate, Stede Bonnet, hanged. And Anne Bonny, she disappears from the historical record. We have no idea what happened to her, which is almost more chilling. The one thing you don't see here, retired peacefully with his treasure. It just didn't happen. And for those who were caught alive, this is what they had to listen to. These are the actual words from a judge sentencing a crew of captured pirates. He's telling them their sins are an intolerable burden, and that their only hope now, moments from death, is to beg God for forgiveness. Imagine standing in a courtroom, in chains, knowing the gallows is waiting for you outside, and this is the last thing you hear. It's the final, crushing judgment of the society they tried so desperately to escape.
So in the end, that's what this whole so-called Golden Age was. It was a flash in the pan, a brief, bloody, brilliant, and brutal rebellion against a world that had no place for these people. It was never going to last. It was a gamble. They traded a long, miserable life of poverty for a very short, very dangerous life of what they considered freedom. And the price for that freedom was almost always a violent early death.
And that really is the question that hangs over all of this, isn't it? When society gives you no options, when you're cornered by poverty and powerlessness, what do? These thousands of men and that handful of remarkable women, they made their choice. They decided to take control of their own fate, even if only for a year or two. And looking back at everything, the brutality, the corruption, the terror, and that brief, shining moment of democracy, you have to ask yourself, was it worth it?